Hello, everyone. I'm Jalila. I'm 38 years old, and I found my 7-year-old son nearly frozen to death on my own front porch after my parents abandoned him to take a vacation to Hawaii. Before I tell you how a book of simple drawings led to them facing criminal charges and a lawsuit that cost them everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The drive home from O'Hare International is always a killer, a grueling stretch of highway that seems to suck the life out of you. But that night in February, it was something else entirely. Snow was coming down in thick, wet, heavy sheets, the kind that slicks the roads into a treacherous black mirror under the streetlights. Every muscle in my body ached with fatigue, but underneath it all, a deep, quiet happiness hummed. The Chicago project, the biggest of my architectural career, the one that would secure a major promotion and a significant life-altering bump to my salary, was a resounding success. I had nailed the presentation, winning over a room of skeptical developers. All I wanted now was to get home to my kids. I was a full day early, and the thought of their surprised, happy faces was the only thing pulling me forward through the blinding snow. My husband, David, had been gone for 3 years. His battle with cancer was short, brutal, and it left a gaping hole in our lives that I was desperately and often clumsily trying to fill for our 2 children, Nathan, who was 7, and Emma, who was 4. David wasn't just my husband. He was the sun our little family orbited around. His laughter was the soundtrack of our home. Now I was just trying to keep the planets from spinning out into the cold, dark, silent void he'd left behind. When he passed, my parents, James and Patricia, had stepped up, or at least that's what it looked like on the surface. "We're here for you, Julila," my father had said, his hand resting heavily on my shoulder at the funeral. His voice was thick with what I mistook for sincerity. "You won't have to do this alone." I was so broken, so adrift in a sea of grief, that I clung to those words like a drowning woman to a life raft. I needed to believe them. As I turned onto my quiet suburban street, that comforting anticipation of being home curdled into a cold spike of dread. A sense of profound wrongness prickled at the back of my neck. The house was dark. Not just downstairs watching a movie dark, but completely, unnervingly pitch black. No porch light on. A small detail that was huge because my mother was neurotically vigilant about it. A dark house is an invitation for trouble, she'd always say. I pulled into the driveway, my headlights cutting a swath across the front of the house, and my heart didn't just stop. It felt like it was ripped out of my chest. There on the porch swing, half covered by a dusting of snow, was a small, huddled shape. For a split second, my mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. A bundle of blankets left outside, a trick of the light. But then the shape moved, a pathetic, shivering tremor that seemed to shake the very foundations of my world. The world didn't just tilt on its axis, it fell off completely. It was Nathan. I threw the car into park, not even bothering to turn off the engine, and was out the door, sprinting across the snow-covered lawn, my dress shoes sinking into the wet slush. "Nathan!" My voice was a choked cry. He looked up, and his face in the faint ambient light from the street lamp was a ghostly portrait of misery. It was pale and bluish, his lips cracked and purple. He was wearing a thin hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. No coat, no hat, no gloves. In the middle of a Chicago February snowstorm. He tried to say my name, a small, hopeful mommy, but his teeth were chattering so violently that the sound shattered into nothingness. I swept him up into my arms. He felt terrifyingly light, fragile, like a little bird. A violent shiver racked his small body, passing straight into mine. He was like a block of ice. "Buddy, what are you doing out here? Where are Grandma and Grandpa? Where's Emma?" I kicked the front door open. It was unlocked, another detail that screamed wrongness, and carried him inside into the freezing, silent house. The air was stale and colder than it was outside. The thermostat read 55 deg. They had turned it down to save a few dollars while my son was left inside. I cranked it up to 75, my own hands shaking uncontrollably. I stripped off his wet, frozen clothes, wrapped him in the thickest blanket I could find from my bed, and held him close on the couch, rubbing his arms and legs with a frantic energy, trying to force my own warmth into him. After several long, terrifying minutes, his shivering subsided just enough for him to speak. He whispered, his voice raspy and weak, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. "They went to Hawaii, Mommy." The words didn't compute. They were so absurd. They sounded like a language I didn't speak. "What? What are you talking about, buddy? Who went to Hawaii?" "Grandma and Grandpa," he whispered, his eyes fluttering closed as his body finally gave in to the warmth and exhaustion. "With Emma. They left 3 days ago." The world went silent. The only sound in the universe was the frantic, sickening pounding of my own heart against my ribs. 3 days. My son had been alone in a cold house for 3 days. Just then, my phone, which I'd forgotten in my coat pocket, started to buzz insistently. I pulled it out with a numb hand. The screen lit up with a picture of my smiling father. The caller ID read, "Dad," and beneath it, a text message he'd sent earlier glowed with an obscene normalcy. "Having trouble with the card. Call me ASAP." I stared at the screen, and a rage I had never known I was capable of, a cold, hard, diamond-pure rage, solidified in my gut. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I wasn't a woman trying to keep the peace in a fractured family. I was a mother, and a storm was coming for them. I silenced the call, dropped the phone on the cushion, and held my son tighter, promising him, and the memory of my husband, that this would never, ever happen again. This nightmare didn't just appear out of thin air. It was a cancer that had been metastasizing for years. I see that now. But at the time, the signs were just a series of painful moments, paper cuts that I kept telling myself weren't deep enough to bleed. I was so desperate for my children to have the loving grandparents that David and I had both grown up with that I ignored the mounting evidence my parents were incapable of being those people. The imbalance, the clear and painful favoritism, was a poison that seeped into everything. It was in the small things. The way my mother Patricia would spend an hour brushing and braiding Emma's hair, cooing about her silky curls while she'd tell Nathan, "Go comb that mop on your head. You look like a little vagrant." It was in the stories they told. Every phone call was a detailed recitation of Emma's latest cute phrase, Emma's drawing from preschool, Emma's funny dance. When I asked, "And how was Nathan?" the answer was always a short, dismissive, "Oh, he was fine, quiet as usual." Quiet wasn't a virtue in their eyes. It was a defect. The breaking point for me, the moment I knew I had to act, came about 4 months before the Hawaii incident. It was the annual parent-teacher conference week. I had to be at the firm for a late-night deadline, so I asked my mother to attend Nathan's conference with his second-grade teacher, Mrs. Gable. I went to Emma's preschool conference myself the day before. When I spoke to Emma's teacher, she was glowing. "Emma is a delight, so social, so bright." My mother would have loved to hear that. The next day, I called her after she was supposed to have met with Mrs. Gable. "So, how did it go?" I asked, hopeful. "It was fine," she said, her voice flat. "The teacher seems nice enough." "What did she say about Nathan's progress?" There was a sigh on the other end of the line, a sound heavy with manufactured burden. "Well, Julila, she seems to think Nathan is too withdrawn, that he doesn't participate enough in group activities. She mentioned his grades in math are slipping a little." My heart sank. Okay. Did she suggest anything? A tutor? Any strategies? "Honestly, I think the woman is making a mountain out of a molehill," my mother said dismissively. I told her, "Nathan's a quiet boy, always has been. Not every child needs to be the center of attention like some of these other kids today." And I told her that maybe if she made her classes more interesting, he wouldn't be so bored. I was floored. "You said that to her?" "Mom, she was trying to raise a concern to help him." I was defending my grandson, she sniffed, her voice taking on that righteous indignation she wore like perfume. "She's a young teacher. She doesn't understand that not all boys are loud and rough. He's sensitive. You're making him sensitive." It was a masterclass in deflection. She hadn't gone to listen. She had gone to lecture. She hadn't gone to help my son. She had gone to defend her own narrative of him. That was the last straw. A few days later, I went to their house, my jaw set. I had rehearsed what I was going to say. I would be calm, logical, and firm. "We need to talk about the teacher conference," I started, sitting at their kitchen table, "and about how you treat the kids." My father, James, looked up from his crossword puzzle, his face a mask of weary impatience. "This again, Julila? We went over this. Your mother handled it." "No, she didn't," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my resolve. "She dismissed a teacher's valid concerns, just like you both dismiss Nathan every single day. The gifts, the attention, the praise. It all goes to Emma. Nathan gets the leftovers. He gets your sighs and your complaints. He's a 7-year-old boy, and you're making him feel like a burden in his own family." My mother, who had been arranging flowers at the sink, turned around, her face a perfect portrait of wounded innocence. "That is a cruel and unfair thing to say, Julila, a truly vicious thing." "Is it?" I challenged, my voice rising. "Was it fair to buy Emma a $200 dollhouse for her birthday and get Nathan a $20 sweater for his? Was it fair to take her for ice cream last week and tell Nathan he had to stay home because he hadn't finished his homework, when he had? We were trying to teach him responsibility," my father boomed. "Something you might want to try. You're coddling him, making him soft. The world isn't soft, Julila." "This isn't about the world. This is about his grandparents," I shot back. "This is about the two people who are supposed to love him unconditionally, making him feel like he has to earn his place." My mother started to cry, but they weren't real tears of sorrow. They were tears of manipulation. "After all we do," she sobbed, sinking into a chair, "we give up our time, our energy. And this is the thanks we get? Accusations? You're still grieving for David, and it's twisting your perspective. You're looking for someone to blame." It was a tactical nuke, bringing up my dead husband, using my grief as a weapon against me. It knocked the wind out of me, just as she knew it would. I stared at them, my father, stern and judgmental, my mother, crumpled and weeping, and I felt the fight drain out of me. They were a perfect team. He was the hammer. She was the velvet glove that hid the fist. They had walled themselves into a fortress of denial and self-pity, and I was just a woman with a battering ram made of feelings. It was useless. I left their house that day feeling smaller and more defeated than ever before. I had tried to fight, and I had lost. Worse, they had made me feel guilty for even trying. They had made me question my own reality. That failure was a bitter pill to swallow, and it taught me that if I ever wanted to win, I couldn't fight them on their terms. I'd have to find a different battlefield entirely. Amidst the constant low-grade warfare of my family life, Nathan had his sanctuary. It was a world built of paper and graphite, of charcoal and ink. His drawing was more than a hobby. It was his language. It was how he processed the world, how he expressed the things he didn't have the words for. He drew fantastical cities with soaring towers and impossible bridges, knights in intricately detailed armor, and quiet, soulful portraits of our golden retriever, Buddy, that captured the dog's personality perfectly. I knew my mother saw it as a mess, a source of stains on his clothes and smudges on the walls. "Why can't he do something productive?" she'd ask. To me, his art was proof of the brilliant, beautiful mind she refused to see. I made a point of celebrating it. We had a gallery wall in my home office where we framed and hung his best pieces. It was our thing. One afternoon, a senior partner at my architecture firm, Mr. Davenport, was at my house for a meeting to go over some final blueprints for the Chicago project. He was in his late 60s, a legend in the field with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue. While I was pulling up some CAD files on my computer, his gaze drifted to the gallery wall. "Who's the artist?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly sharp with genuine interest. That's my son, Nathan," I said, a little taken aback. He got up from his chair and walked over, his expensive shoes silent on the hardwood floor. He peered closely at a detailed drawing of a futuristic suspension bridge, a design that was both whimsical and structurally sound. "My God, Julila," he breathed. "The perspective here, the control of the line work. He understands spatial relationships. How old is he?" "He's 7, I said, a swell of pride rising in my chest. Mr. Davenport turned to look at me. His eyes, which I had only ever seen as critical and assessing, were wide with something that looked like awe. "7, Julila, this is not normal talent. This is not a hobby. This is prodigious." He tapped the glass of the frame. "You have a responsibility to nurture this. This is a gift, a serious one." He then reached into his elegant leather briefcase and pulled out a folded glossy brochure. He flattened it on my desk with a decisive snap. The header was printed in an elegant, bold font, National Youth Artist Showcase. "A good friend of mine is on the judging committee for this," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's the most prestigious competition for young artists in the country. The deadline for submissions is in 2 months. You should enter his work. I'm not asking, Julila. I'm telling you, don't let this go to waste." After he left, I held the heavy, glossy paper in my hands. It felt like more than a brochure. It felt like validation. It was an objective, professional confirmation of what I already knew in my heart. Someone else saw my son, someone important. That evening, I sat down with Nathan and showed him the brochure. His eyes, so often clouded with a quiet melancholy, lit up with a spark of pure, undiluted excitement. "You think I'm good enough, Mommy?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I know you are, buddy," I said, pulling him into a hug. We spent the next few weeks carefully selecting his 5 best pieces, matting them, and preparing the online submission. It became our secret mission, a hopeful project that was just for us. At the time, I thought of it simply as a wonderful way to boost my son's fragile confidence. I had no idea that this little brochure, this act of seeing my son's talent, would one day become my most powerful and unexpected weapon. With their emotional manipulation firmly established, the next phase of my parents' campaign was financial. My father, James, had a lifelong obsession with money, mostly centered on his lack of it. A series of bad investments in the 90s and a general inability to live within his means had left him and my mother in a precarious position in their retirement. He saw my success not with pride, but with a kind of grasping envy. He started with subtle, guilt-inducing comments dropped into our phone calls. "Took Emma to that new tumble class," he'd say with a heavy sigh. "You wouldn't believe what they charge, but she loves it so much. What can you do?" Or, "Had to buy a whole new set of groceries for your place. The kids eat like horses. It all adds up, you know." I was already paying them a generous monthly stipend for their help, far more than any local daycare or nanny would charge. But I was worn down, and arguing with them was exhausting. "Just text me the receipts, Dad," I'd say. "I'll Zelle you the money." But that wasn't enough. He didn't want reimbursement. He wanted control. He wanted a slush fund. The full court press came one Sunday afternoon when he came over to help me fix a leaky faucet. He cornered me in the kitchen, his voice low and conspiratorial. "You know, Julila, your mother and I were talking. We feel a bit like hired help sometimes, having to ask you for every little thing." "That's not my intention," I said wearily, already sensing where this was going. "We want to do more for the kids," he continued, laying the sentiment on thick. "That coding camp you mentioned for Nathan, the advanced ballet lessons for Emma. If we had a little more flexibility, a little autonomy, we could just handle it. It would make us feel more like, actual grandparents, more trusted, a real part of their upbringing." The phrase, "part of their upbringing," was the expertly chosen bait. He knew my deepest fear was my children growing up without a complete, loving family unit. He was selling me a fantasy and making me pay for it. Against every screaming instinct in my gut, I caved. But I wasn't a complete fool. I was cautious. I refused to give them access to my primary accounts, or, God forbid, the kids' main college fund. That account was sacred ground, a testament to our hopes for their future, the one David and I had started the day each of them was born. Instead, I went to the bank the next day and opened an entirely separate checking account. I designed it as a controlled system. I deposited $5,000 to start and set up an automatic monthly transfer of $1,000 from my own account. I had a debit card issued for that account only. When I gave it to my father, I explained the rules with what I thought was perfect clarity. "This is the kids' expense card," I said, handing it to him. "Use it for their groceries, clothes, classes, school supplies. That's its sole purpose. I'll get an alert for every transaction so I can track the spending." He took it from me, his smile wide and magnanimous. "Of course, sweetheart, this is perfect. It shows you trust us. You won't regret this." The irony of those words now makes me sick to my stomach. A few weeks later, the final piece of the trap was set. My boss, Mr. Davenport, called me into his office. "Jalila," he said, his face serious, "the Chicago developers loved your initial designs. They've moved up the timeline. They want a full in-person presentation at their headquarters. This is the big one. The whole firm is counting on you. If you land this contract, it means a partnership track, a full promotion." It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of career-defining moment that would secure my children's future 10 times over. The only catch? The presentation was in 8 days, and it required me to be in Chicago for a full week. My heart sank. A week. My sister-in-law, Sarah, David's sister, and my only real support, was on a 2-week trip to Europe. My best friend's wife had just had a baby. I was completely, totally out of options. I had to ask my parents. When I told them, my mother's face lit up with an almost unnerving enthusiasm. "A whole week? Of course we'll take them. Don't you worry about a thing. You go and focus on your work. This is wonderful news, honey." My father patted me on the back, a gesture that felt more like he was claiming a prize than offering support. Go make us proud, sweetheart. We've got everything here under control. They seemed so genuinely happy for me, so eager to help, and because I so desperately needed them to be, I chose to believe them. I ignored the cold, heavy knot of dread in my stomach. I packed my bags, kissed my children goodbye, and walked away, leaving them in the care of the two people I should have trusted the least in the world. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just leaving for a business trip. I was leaving my son on the doorstep of the greatest betrayal of his young life. The first few days in Chicago were a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings, late-night revisions in my hotel room, and the kind of adrenaline-fueled focus that only a career-defining project can induce. But no matter how consumed I was by the work, a part of my mind was always back home. I called every single night, needing to hear my kids' voices to anchor me. The first night, a Tuesday, my mother answered. Her voice was bright and breezy. "Oh, they're already fast asleep, honey. We wore them out with a big day at the park." It was 7:30 p.m. A little early for Nathan, but plausible. "Everything is just wonderful," she chirped. "Don't you worry about a thing." I asked her to tell them I love them. "Of course, dear. Sleep well." The second night, Wednesday, my father picked up. His voice was brisk, almost rushed. "Can't talk long, Jules. Just about to give Emma her bath, and Nathan's in the middle of a movie with a big bowl of popcorn." "Can I just talk to Nate for a second?" I asked. Don't want to interrupt him. This is his favorite movie. You know how he gets. We're doing great. Talk tomorrow." He hung up before I could protest. A little prickle of unease started at the back of my neck. They never wanted me to talk to the kids. Thursday night, it was my mother again. Her voice was even more effusive than before. "Hello, darling. Oh, you wouldn't believe the day we had. We took the kids to the Children's Museum. They had an absolute ball. They're completely exhausted. Just fell into bed." "The Children's Museum, that's great," I said, feeling a pang of guilt for not being there. "So they're asleep already?" "Like little angels," she confirmed. "I'll give them an extra big hug and kiss from their mommy." Each call was like a perfectly painted theatrical backdrop. It looked real from a distance, but up close you could see the cracks. The excuses were too smooth. The cheerfulness was too loud. It felt rehearsed. By Friday, the gnawing anxiety had become a heavy stone in my gut. I tried to push it down, telling myself I was being paranoid, that my failed confrontation months ago had made me overly suspicious and untrusting. I had to focus on the final presentation. I tried calling Friday morning before the meeting. No answer. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again at lunchtime. Voicemail again. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I sent a text message, my thumb shaking slightly. "Hey, everything okay? Haven't been able to reach you. Please call me." Hours crawled by. Silence. I walked into that final presentation feeling like I was moving underwater. I smiled. I shook hands. I delivered the pitch of my life with a calm, confident voice, while a silent scream was building inside my mind. Where are my children? After the handshakes and the enthusiastic congratulations from the developers, after securing the project that would change my career forever, the moment I was alone in the hallway, I yanked my phone out again. Finally, there was a text message. It was from my mother. It was so brief, so casual, that it was utterly chilling. "So sorry, crazy day. Went on a little impromptu field trip. Everyone is fine. Talk tonight." A field trip, on a Friday. A field trip that made them unreachable all day. The lies were unraveling. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. My work in Chicago was done. The partners were planning a celebratory steak dinner that night. I made my decision in a split second. I found my boss, Mr. Davenport, who was beaming. "They loved it, Julila. They're drawing up the contracts." "We did it, sir. Thank you for everything," I said, my voice tight. "There's a family emergency I have to get home to. I'm catching the next flight out." His smile faded, replaced by concern. "Of course, Julila. Everything all right?" "I hope so," I said. "I'll call you from home." I booked a flight leaving in less than 2 hours. On the frantic cab ride to O'Hare, and during the entire turbulent flight home through the storm, I was no longer rehearsing arguments. I was playing out disaster scenarios. Car accident, a sudden illness. My mind refused to go to the one place it should have. The truth was so monstrous, so far outside the bounds of normal human behavior, that my imagination simply couldn't conceive of it. The sight of Nathan on that porch swing, as I've already told you, didn't just break my heart. It fundamentally rewired my soul. After getting him inside, wrapped in blankets, and shivering uncontrollably on the couch, my first instinct was to call 911. But he was conscious. He was talking. And a selfish part of me, the part that still couldn't believe my own parents were capable of such a monstrous act, needed to understand before I brought the whole world crashing down. I held him, talking to him softly, telling him he was safe, that Mommy was home. I made him some warm tomato soup and grilled cheese, his favorite comfort food. He ate with a desperate, frantic hunger that was terrifying to watch. He devoured it like a starving animal, not a 7-year-old boy in his own home. Was there no food, Nate? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid of the answer. He swallowed a big gulp of soup. There was some cereal, he said, his voice small and raspy. But we ran out of milk yesterday, and some bread, but it got all hard and crunchy. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and earnest, as if he was afraid he'd done something wrong. I tried to make toast, but I'm not allowed to use the toaster by myself. My throat closed up. He had followed the rules. He had been a good boy while he was starving. What else did you do, buddy, for 3 whole days? I watched TV mostly, he said, looking down at his soup. It was scary at night. The house makes noises. I know it does, I said, my heart aching. I slept in your bed, he confessed, as if it were a crime, because it smells like you. And I brought Buddy in, but he cried a lot because he had to go potty outside. He was worried about the dog. In the midst of his own terror and abandonment, he was worried about our golden retriever. The sheer, heartbreaking goodness of him was a knife in my gut. When did they leave, Nate? Tell me everything you remember, I urged gently. It was Wednesday morning, he said, his memory sharp and clear. Grandma woke me up. She was all dressed up. She said they were going on a special trip with Emma because Emma was her special princess. He paused, then added, She said I had to be a big boy soldier and stay home to protect the house from robbers. The cold, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. They hadn't just left him. They had poisoned him with a lie. They had framed their abandonment as a noble mission, a burden he had to carry. I tried, Mommy, he said, his little chin trembling. I locked the doors every night. I checked them 3 times. You did so good, Buddy, I choked out. You were so brave. Did they say where they were going? A place with a beach, he said, struggling with the unfamiliar word. Hawaii. Hawaii. The name hung in the air of the cold room, so grotesquely out of place, so monumentally selfish, that I almost laughed. A hysterical, broken laugh. They had taken my daughter to a tropical paradise and left my son to freeze and starve in a Chicago winter. That was it. The last shred of doubt, the last vestige of filial loyalty evaporated. I bundled Nathan up in my own thick, down-filled winter coat, which swallowed him whole, carried him to the car, and drove straight to the nearest hospital emergency room. I didn't care about appearances. I didn't care about a family feud. I cared about an evidence. I cared about having an official, undeniable record of what they had done to my son. The ER was a chaotic blur of fluorescent lights, beeping machines, and the sharp, clean smell of antiseptic. A kind, calm, middle-aged doctor named Dr. Evans took charge. She had a gentle way with Nathan, making him laugh with a silly joke about her stethoscope. But her eyes were sharp and deadly serious as she listened to my clipped, factual account of the past 3 days. She and a nurse went to work, checking his vitals, his temperature, his hydration levels, drawing blood. They wrapped him in heated blankets. After about an hour, Dr. Evans came back to the curtained-off room where I was holding Nathan's hand. Physically, he's going to be fine, she said, her voice low and professional, but with an undercurrent of anger that I recognized and appreciated. He's suffering from mild hypothermia and significant dehydration, but we've got him warmed up and IV fluids going. His core temperature is almost back to normal. No frostbite, thank God. We'd like to keep him for a few more hours for observation, just to be absolutely sure. A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. Thank you, doctor, thank you. She put a comforting hand on my arm, but her expression hardened. Ms. Miller, she said, her voice dropping even lower, I need you to understand. I am legally and morally obligated to report this to the Department of Child and Family Services. I understand, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And I want you to. I want a full report. I want everything documented, every detail. She gave me a firm, resolute nod. You'll have it. Sitting there in the sterile quiet of the hospital, holding my son's small, warm hand, everything became brutally, beautifully clear. The years of subtle favoritism, the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, the financial theft. It was all a prelude to this. This was not a mistake. This was not a lapse in judgment. This was a choice. They had chosen to discard my son like he was garbage. And I was going to spend the rest of my life making sure they regretted it. After Nathan was discharged, looking small and pale but safe in a new set of warm clothes the hospital provided, we went home. I tucked him into my own bed, surrounding him with a fortress of pillows. He was asleep in seconds, his little body finally giving in to the safety he had been denied. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the heavy, charged silence before a war. I went straight to my office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. My hands were steady. The rage had burned away the shakes, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I needed to see the full extent of the damage. I needed the paper trail. First, I logged into the separate expense account I had set up for them, the one with the debit card. As I expected, it was nearly empty. The transaction history told a story of escalating audacity. There were the usual grocery store charges, a few small purchases from Target, a trip to a local toy store where they had clearly loaded up on things for Emma. And then there was the final transaction from Wednesday morning, a cash withdrawal from their home bank's ATM. $2,000. My mother's lie about a field trip flashed in my mind. That must have been their pocket money for paradise. My jaw was clenched so tight it ached. With a sense of dread, I navigated to the main login page for the college fund. This was the account that held my children's future, my hopes, the legacy of David's love and planning. It was sacred ground, and they had trespassed upon it. I typed in my password and hit enter. The account summary loaded onto the screen. My eyes scanned the balance, and my breath caught in my throat. It was thousands of dollars lower than it should have been, and then I saw it. A single transaction posted on Wednesday morning, just hours after they would have woken Nathan up with their lies. Wire transfer to Aloha Dreams, Travel LLC, minus $15,000. $15,000. I couldn't breathe. It was a physical sensation, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs and left me gasping. They hadn't just used the expense account I gave them. They had found a way into the handgun heart of my children's security. The premeditation of it was what truly staggered me. They must have gone through my desk while I was at work, found the account statements, stolen the routing and account numbers. They would have had to forge my signature or impersonate me on the phone. This was a calculated criminal act. I clicked on the transaction details. The recipient's name, Aloha Dreams Travel, made me want to smash the laptop against the wall. They had stolen my children's education money to pay for their 5-star grade A betrayal. The rage that had been simmering inside me for days, for years, finally exploded. It was a clean, purifying fire. All the grief, all the exhaustion, all the self-doubt, all the times I had let them make me feel small and weak. It all burned away, leaving behind only a cold, hard crystal of certainty. Just at that moment, as if summoned by the sheer force of my fury, my phone, which I'd set on the desk, rang. The screen lit up with my father's smiling, tanned face. I let it ring once, twice, then I picked it up. "Julila!" he barked into the phone, his voice tight and laced with indignant anger. "What the hell is going on? We're at a nice restaurant here, trying to have a decent meal, and the card was declined." I took a deep, centering breath. I forced my voice to be level, almost bored, a stark contrast to the inferno raging inside me. "Oh, that's weird," I said, the words tasting like ice. "The bank must have flagged some suspicious activity and put a temporary freeze on the account. You know how they are with security these days." "Suspicious activity? What are you talking about? The only activity is us trying to buy dinner," he sputtered. "Don't worry about it, Dad," I said, and a cruel, cold smile I didn't recognize touched my lips. "I'll sort it all out when you get back. You just enjoy the rest of your vacation." I hung up the phone before he could respond, cutting off his angry sputtering. I had them. They had no idea that I knew. They were thousands of miles away, sunning themselves on a stolen beach, worried about their dinner bill, while I was sitting in the ruins of their treachery, holding all the evidence, all the power, all the cards. The game had changed, and I was about to rewrite every single one of the rules. The next morning, I was a woman reborn. The grief-stricken, accommodating daughter was gone, and in her place stood a cold, efficient strategist. The rage had cooled overnight into a focused, methodical calm. There would be no more emotional confrontations they could twist and weaponize against me. This was a logistical problem now, a war to be won not with shouting, but with paperwork and precision. My first stop at 8 a.m. sharp was the bank. I didn't go to a teller. I had made an appointment with the branch manager, a sharp woman named Miss Albright. I sat in her glass-walled office and laid out the situation in stark, unemotional terms, presenting her with a copy of Nathan's hospital discharge papers. Her professional demeanor cracked, replaced by a look of horrified sympathy. She worked with a swift, angry efficiency. The compromised expense account was closed. The debit card was deactivated. Then we turned to the main event, the college fund. I had her move every single penny from that fund into a new, ironclad, irrevocable trust account. This new account was a fortress. It required dual-factor authentication tied to my cell phone, a verbal password known only to me, and any withdrawal over $500 required my physical signature in the presence of a bank officer. Not even I could easily access it. As I signed the final forms, I felt a heavy, satisfying lock click into place, securing what little was left of my children's future. The bank's fraud department had already flagged the $15,000 wire transfer as highly unusual. I sat with their investigator and gave a sworn, recorded statement confirming it was entirely unauthorized. "I want to press charges," I said, my voice unwavering. An official investigation was opened. Every signature, every form was another brick in the wall I was building between my children and the toxicity of my parents. My next call was to a name I'd gotten from Mr. Davenport months ago, filed away for a rainy day I never thought would come. David Chen. A family law attorney with a reputation for being a tactical genius, a shark who swam in the bloodied waters of high-conflict family disputes. His office was in a sleek, intimidating skyscraper downtown. David was in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, and radiated an aura of calm, lethal competence. I didn't give him the emotional, rambling version of the story. I gave him the facts, just as I had with the bank manager. I laid out the timeline, the history of neglect, the gaslighting, the abandonment, the medical report from Dr. Evans, the unauthorized bank transactions, the lies over the phone. I slid a neatly organized folder across his polished mahogany desk, containing printouts of everything. He listened without a single interruption, his dark eyes scanning each document as I spoke. When I was finished, he steepled his fingers, leaned back in his leather chair, and looked at me for a long moment. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice even and measured, "this is one of the most egregious cases of parental misconduct I've seen in some time. What is your desired outcome?" "I want the money back," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Every single cent. And I want to ensure they can never, ever get near my children again. I want to discuss sole legal custody, a permanent restraining order, whatever it takes to legally sever their rights as grandparents. I want them erased from my children's lives." David gave a slow, deliberate nod. "We can certainly achieve that," he said. "The evidence is overwhelming. We'll file a civil suit for the return of the funds, plus significant punitive damages for the emotional distress inflicted upon you and your son, and I strongly, strongly advise you to follow through on filing a criminal complaint. A criminal record will make any future attempt by them to gain visitation rights through the courts nearly impossible." "Good," I said. The word felt solid, final. "What's our first move?" "Our first move," David said, "is to do nothing." A thin, cold smile played on his lips. "We wait for them to come home. We let them walk, tanned and self-satisfied, straight into the trap they so diligently set for themselves. Don't contact them. Don't answer their calls. Let them stew in their own arrogance." I left his office feeling powerful. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to my parents' whims. I was planning. I had a professional, an expert, a general on my side. I wasn't just their daughter anymore, I was a hot client, and we had a rock-solid case. That night, after tucking both kids into bed, Nathan now sleeping soundly in his own room again, the fear of the dark slowly receding, I found myself unable to rest. I wandered into my office, and my eyes fell on Nathan's sketchbook. It was the one with all his best work, the pieces we had so carefully photographed and submitted for the art competition. As I was putting it away on his shelf, my laptop, which I'd left open on my desk, pinged with the soft chime of a new email. I glanced at it without much interest. The sender was National Youth Artist Showcase. My heart gave a little jolt. In the chaos and rage of the last few days, I had completely, utterly forgotten about it. The subject line read, "An important update regarding your submission for Nathan Miller." My hands trembled slightly as I sat down and clicked it open. I was expecting a polite, formulaic rejection. A "thank you for your submission. We received many qualified entries." But that's not what it said. The email was short, formal, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. Dear Ms. Miller, it is with immense pleasure that the Board of Judges and I inform you that Nathan Miller has been awarded the grand prize in the 7 to 10 age category for the National Youth Artist Showcase. His portfolio, Cityscapes and Creatures, demonstrated a maturity of vision and a technical skill that was frankly unprecedented in this age group. The award includes a cash prize of $3,000 and a 2-page feature in our annual publication, Young Masters. Furthermore, as part of our mission to connect young artists with the professional art world, we shared the winning portfolios with a select group of gallery partners. And we have already been contacted by the Galerie de Jeunesse in Soho, New York City. They are exceptionally interested in acquiring several of Nathan's pieces for their upcoming Young Masters of the 21st Century exhibition and would like to discuss terms of purchase at your earliest convenience. Congratulations to the gifted young artist. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fierce, vindicated pride. I leaned back in my chair, the email glowing in the dark room. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed a nuclear warhead in the middle of what she thought was just a knife fight. They thought my son was a burden, a messy, difficult, worthless problem. They had cast him aside for his more fun sister. But in the real world, the world outside their tiny, toxic, self-serving bubble, my son was a grand prize winner, a recognized talent, an artist sought after by a New York City gallery. The board was set, the pieces were in place, and I was holding the checkmate move in my hand. All I had to do now was wait for the king and queen to arrogantly walk right into my line of fire. They came back on a Sunday evening, 2 full days after I had hung up on my father in Hawaii. I knew exactly when they were coming. I had tracked their flight online, watching its little icon crawl across the map of the United States. My lawyer, David Chen, sat in the wingback armchair in my living room, looking as calm and relaxed as if he were waiting for a pot of tea to brew. A thick leather briefcase rested by his feet. The house was clean, quiet, and humming with a tense, palpable energy. It felt like the air in the moments before a lightning strike. The sound of the key in the front door lock was unnaturally loud in the silence. The door swung open and they walked in, wheeling their designer suitcases behind them. They were deeply tanned, their faces glowing with a week of sun and self-satisfaction. They looked relaxed and entitled. My mother was holding a tacky plastic hula dancer doll, presumably for Emma. My father was humming a cheerful off-key tune. They looked, for all the world, like any other retired couple returning from a well-deserved vacation. Then they saw me sitting on the couch, and they saw David, a stranger in a sharp suit, in their daughter's living room. The smiles froze and evaporated from their faces. "Julila," my mother said, her voice immediately sharp and laced with suspicion. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. "What's going on? Who is this man?" "This is David Chen," I said, my voice flat, cold, and devoid of any emotion. "He's my attorney." The word lawyer landed in the center of the room like a grenade. My father's face, which had been a cheerful, sun-kissed pink, began to mottle and pale. "A lawyer?" he sputtered, his voice a mixture of confusion and outrage. "What in God's name for? Are you being sued?" "No," I said, "you are." David stood up, a gesture of polite, commanding authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said, his tone perfectly courteous but firm. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to the couch opposite his armchair. They hesitated, looking from me to David and back again, before perching stiffly on the edge of the cushions, their suitcases abandoned by the door. My father, ever the bully, recovered first, deciding that offense was the best defense. "I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, Julila, but it's not funny. Your mother and I were publicly humiliated. Our card was declined in a packed restaurant, and you wouldn't answer your phone. We were worried sick that something had happened to you." "I'm worried." I repeated the word in my head, letting it hang in the air like poison gas. "You were worried? That's an interesting choice of words." David leaned forward slightly, placing his hands on his knees. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice smooth as silk, but with an edge of steel. "We're here to discuss the events of the past week. Specifically, the time period from Wednesday morning, February 12th, to Saturday evening, February 15th. My mother clutched her purse tighter. "I don't know what there is to discuss," she said quickly. "We took a short, much-needed trip. We're retired. We're allowed to travel." "A trip to Hawaii, I believe," David said, his voice never changing its calm, measured tone. He reached into his briefcase, took out a single sheet of paper, and placed it on the coffee table between them. It was a printout of their flight and luxury hotel package confirmation from Aloha Dreams Travel. "An all-inclusive package, I see," David said, "paid for with a wire transfer of $15,000 from your grandchildren's joint college fund." My father stared at the paper as if it were a snake. His mouth opened and closed silently. No sound came out. My mother's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "That was a loan," she sputtered, her voice high and reedy. "We discussed it. We were going to pay it back. It was for a medical emergency." "A medical emergency?" David repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Whose? Yours?" "Your father's," she snapped, her tone suddenly defensive. "It was preventative treatment." "For my circulation," my father added, grasping at straws. "The warm weather is therapeutic." "I see," David said, his voice laced with ice. "And while you were on this therapeutic trip, what provisions did you make for the care and safety of your 7-year-old grandson, Nathan?" "Nathan was perfectly fine," my father boomed, trying to project confidence. "We left him plenty of food. He's a big boy. For God's sake, we weren't gone that long. He knows how to use a phone." David reached back into his briefcase and placed a second sheet of paper on the table. It was the official admission report from St. Jude's Hospital Emergency Room, signed by Dr. Evans. The words hypothermia, dehydration, and child neglect were highlighted in yellow. "According to the emergency room physician who treated him on Saturday night," David said, "he was not fine. He was found on your front porch in the middle of a snowstorm with a core body temperature of 94 degrees. He hadn't had a proper meal in over 3 days. The official medical diagnosis is child abandonment." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, putting a hand to her mouth. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of genuine horror in her eyes. It was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by reflexive, venomous defensiveness. "He's always been a dramatic boy," she said, her voice shaking with rage, not remorse. "He's probably exaggerating to get attention. He's always been difficult." "He's a difficult child," my father echoed, nodding vigorously. "Always has been moody, withdrawn. He's not like Emma. Emma is pure sunshine. She's a joy to be around. It's easier to connect with her. You should understand that, Julila. You're his mother." I just stared at him. My own anger was so immense it had become a profound, ringing silence in my ears. He was admitting it. He was sitting in my living room, in front of my lawyer, and admitting that they favored one grandchild to the point of criminally neglecting the other, because the neglected one was difficult. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was breathtaking. "So you just cast him aside?" I asked, my voice dangerously low, each word a carefully placed stone. "Because he's not fun enough for you? Because he's quiet? Because he'd rather sit and draw than dance to whatever tune you're playing that day?" "Oh, the drawing," my mother said, with a contemptuous roll of her eyes, a sneer twisting her perfectly lipsticked mouth. "That's half the problem right there. He's always off in his own little world, making a mess with his charcoal and his pencils. It's not healthy. It's not normal. He needs to be more engaged with the real world, not hiding away with his silly little scribbles." And that was it. That was the trigger. She had walked right into the crosshairs. I looked at David. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. And it was time. I stood up slowly, walked over to my desk, and picked up a crisp white, business-sized envelope. I walked back and placed it gently on the coffee table, right on top of the damning hospital report. "You're right about one thing," I said softly, my voice resonating in the tense silence. "He is in his own little world, and in that world, he creates things. You see them as a mess. The rest of the world, however, seems to disagree." My father squinted at the envelope, which was emblazoned with the official-looking crest of the National Youth Artist Showcase. "What is this?" he demanded. "That," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and power I hadn't felt in years, "is the official letter of notification from the judges of the most prestigious youth art competition in the country. It's informing me that your difficult grandson, the one with the unhealthy and messy hobby, has just won the grand prize." Their faces went blank, minds scrambling to compute what they were hearing. The prize comes with a feature in a national publication, I continued, and a check for $3,000. I let that sink in. They didn't move, didn't speak. The shock was total. I wasn't done. And this, I said, pulling out my phone, unlocking it, and placing it next to the letter, the glowing screen displaying the email from the Galerie de Jeunesse in Soho, New York. This is a formal offer from a gallery. They want to purchase 5 of his silly little scribbles for an upcoming exhibition. They're asking me to name my price. Silence. A deep, profound, soul-crushing silence that was louder than any screaming match could ever be. I watched the color drain from their faces. I watched their entire worldview, the one where Emma was the golden child, the prized asset, and Nathan was the liability, shatter into a million invisible pieces. Their justification, their excuses, their entire pathetic narrative, annihilated by a single envelope and an email on a phone. They had built their kingdom on the unshakable belief that my son Nathan was worthless. And I had just proven, in the most undeniable, public, and financially validated way possible, that he was priceless. The look on their faces, the utter, stupefied, slack-jawed shock, was more satisfying than any apology could ever be. It was the beautiful, terrible sound of their world breaking apart, and I savored every second of it. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 30 seconds. My parents just stared at the evidence on the coffee table, the prize letter, the glowing phone, as if it were alien technology they couldn't comprehend. My father's jaw was slack, his usual bluster completely gone. My mother's hands were trembling in her lap, her knuckles white. David Chen, the consummate professional, chose this precise moment of their utter devastation to deliver the final judgment. He leaned forward again, his voice calm and methodical, the voice of a surgeon making a final, clean, and unavoidable incision. "So, to summarize," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you stand accused of felony child abandonment under state law, which I assure you the district attorney's office takes very seriously. This carries a potential prison sentence." He paused, letting the words settle into the unnatural quiet. "You have also committed financial fraud by illegally accessing and transferring $15,000 from a protected trust fund. That is grand larceny." Their faces contorted, lips twitching, eyes darting. David continued, perfectly composed. "Here is what is going to happen next. We will be filing a civil suit this week, demanding the immediate return of the stolen $15,000. In addition, we will be suing for punitive damages for the extreme emotional distress inflicted upon my client and her minor son. We have settled on the amount of $30,000. He looked them both in the eye. "That is a total of $45,000 you owe my client." My father made a choking, gagging sound. $45,000? We don't have that kind of money. You know that, Julila. "Then I suggest you contact a realtor," David said without a trace of sympathy, "because your house should cover it." He let that land before continuing. "Furthermore, my client has already given her full sworn statement to the police. A detective from the Family Services Division will likely be contacting you within the next 48 hours to take your statements. I strongly, strongly advise you to retain your own counsel before speaking with them. Though frankly, at this point, I'm not sure what a lawyer could do for you." This was the moment the dam of their denial finally broke. And what poured out was not a flood of remorse. It was a sewer of pathetic, desperate self-pity. "Julila, you can't do this to us," my mother wailed, her voice cracking, her face contorting into a mask of terror. "We're your parents, your own mother and father. It was a mistake. We made a terrible mistake." And then, in her panic, she revealed the true, rotten core of her motivation. It was a confession she didn't even realize she was making. He just looks at me sometimes," she stammered, tears streaming down her face, her eyes wild as she looked at me, but spoke of Nathan. "He has the same quiet, judging eyes my older brother always had. My brother got everything. The praise from my father, the best grades, the attention. I got nothing. I was invisible." She choked back a sob. I didn't want Emma to ever feel like that. I wanted her to have everything, to be the special one. There it was, the whole twisted, pathetic truth. It was never about Nathan's personality. It was never about him being difficult. It was about her own ghosts, her bitter, unresolved childhood jealousy of her brother projected onto my innocent 7-year-old son. He was just a convenient, silent screen onto which she could project a lifetime of resentment. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I thought I might be sick. This was deeper, sicker, and more twisted than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just favoritism. It was generational poison. They hadn't just failed Nathan, they had failed themselves. And now they were facing the reckoning. I stood up. David followed. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to argue, no tears left to cry. They had shown me everything I needed to know about them, about their capacity for cruelty, about how deep their selfishness ran. I will have no further contact with either of you, I said, my voice clear and final. You will not call me. You will not visit. You will not send letters or gifts. If you attempt to contact my children in any form, I will file for a permanent restraining order and ensure criminal charges follow. My mother whimpered. My father opened his mouth to protest, but the look on David's face silenced him instantly. You don't get to play the victims, I continued. You made choices. You lied. You abandoned a child. And you stole from your grandchildren. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not a bad moment. That's a character trait. I turned to David. We're done here. He nodded once, professionally. I didn't look at them again as we walked out. I didn't wait to see if they followed. I didn't care if they sat there for hours trying to spin the story in their heads into something more palatable. I was done digesting their delusions. By the time we reached the driveway, the cold February air had never felt more refreshing. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of someone else's expectations in my lungs. David opened his car door, then paused. I'll start drafting the filing tomorrow. You've done everything right so far. Thank you, I said, and meant it. I went back inside to find Nathan curled up on the couch, sketchbook in his lap, a pencil tucked behind one ear. He looked up at me and smiled, just a little. Hey, sweet pea, I said softly, sitting beside him. What you working on? He turned the page around and showed me. It was a drawing of our house, but not how it looked now. It was brighter, warmer, with vines climbing the porch posts, a giant treehouse in the backyard, and a big, happy sun with a smiling face above it all. There were 3 stick figures on the porch. A woman, a boy, and a girl with pigtails. Our family. Just us. I pulled him into my arms and held him close. It's beautiful, I whispered. Later that night, I emailed the gallery in New York. We began discussions about pricing and prints. Within a week, Nathan's first piece sold for $800. A month later, he had his first full-page feature in Young Masters. Emma adjusted. She missed them, of course, but she also understood more than any of us had given her credit for. One night, she asked me if Nathan would be okay. He's more than okay, I said, brushing her hair behind her ear. He's extraordinary, just like you. She smiled, climbed into bed, and slept soundly. As for me, I learned that cutting ties doesn't make you heartless. It means you finally decided your heart deserves peace. My parents tried to spin their own version of the story in our extended family. Claimed I was ungrateful, that I had exaggerated, that I had turned my children against them. But the truth always floats to the surface. And people talk, especially when word gets out that your grandson was on the cover of a national art magazine, and you didn't even call to say congratulations. The final blow came from the county's decision. David pushed the district attorney's office just hard enough. My parents were offered a plea deal, return the money, and complete 500 hours of community service in lieu of jail time. They took it. Of course they did. They were banned from any unsupervised contact with minors. Their names were placed on a watch list for elder abuse prevention programs, an irony that didn't escape me. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply moved on. I joined a local single parents group. I started therapy. I worked less overtime, spent more evenings at home, and made Friday nights our pizza and movie tradition. One evening, months later, as I was tidying up the living room, I found a folded sheet of paper tucked between the cushions of the couch. It was a letter, written in Nathan's careful, blocky handwriting. Dear Mommy, thank you for coming to get me. I was scared, but I knew you would come. I love you, and I want you to be happy. I'm happy now. Love. Nathan. I sat down right there on the floor and let myself cry. Not because I was sad, not because I was angry, but because I had fought for my son, and for once in my life, I had won. Not just in court, but in the only place that mattered. His heart.